Rebecca Alpert, Temple University, well known to many of you. Her presentation today, which we call the luncheon keynote address, Who is that Masked Man? Buster Haywood and Black Baseball's Invisible Jews.
I'm hoping that, there, I am standing. Okay, we're on, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, could fool me, but we'll find out. I can't turn the page and chew gum at the same time. I think this was called the keynote because we're doing it during a meal, or it was Len's way of making me not feel so bad about being the last speaker. But this is a slightly off the beaten path topic. Comes from it's a side venture in a book that I just completed called Out of Left Field: Jews and Black Baseball. And when I began researching Jewish participation in black baseball, that was fueled originally by my interest in the iconic status of Jackie Robinson among Jews, I was telling a friend who was black and Jewish about these Jewish owners of Negro League teams and Jewish sports writers who were fighting for integration that I had been studying. And he said, well, I'll bet you some of those Negro League players, they had to be Jewish too. I said, all right, Walter, prove it to me. So a few weeks later, he introduced me to a man named Rabbi Curtis Caldwell, whose Temple Beth El Hebrew Israelite community, in fact, fielded not one Jewish player, but an entire black baseball team in the 1920s and 1930s in Virginia. This team was called the Belleville Grays. They played against well-known Negro League teams and sent some of their players on to play at the highest professional levels available to blacks in segregated America. The team itself was a mix of local stars and community members. And one of their players was a man named Alpert, generally known as Buster Haywood, who was born in 1910 and died in 2000. He stood out to me, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about him and follow his career, and what follows here is what I've learned about Buster. In baseball, the catcher crouches behind home plate. Let's see if we can make him crouch behind. Magic. Let's see, what's the magic? Press the magic button to me. Okay, I'm afraid, Mikhail, I may have to press you into service since I can't seem to figure out how to press the button properly. Okay, so in baseball, the catcher crouches behind home plate, creating the target with his body for the pitcher to throw the ball. Catchers wear special equipment to protect themselves: shin guards, chest protectors, masks. Those masks serve not only to protect, but to conceal. Or in the words of Paul Laurence Dunbar about blacks in that era, we wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. Haywood's mask hid a multitude of complex identities and concerns, including his connection to this Hebrew Israelite community and his feelings about the clowning tradition in black baseball in which Jewish owners played a major role. The black baseball era began in the 1890s when blacks were barred from playing on white teams. Black baseball was often referred to as shadow ball because its existence was not well known outside the African American community, although its quality rivaled that of white major league or high-level minor leagues. Beginning in 1920, many of the best teams were organized into what we now know as the Negro Leagues. But the league structures were fragile, and most black baseball was played by independent traveling teams against a variety of white and black teams. Haywood played on league and so-called barnstorming teams in the last era of black professional baseball from 1932 to 1954. Next slide. Haywood began his career as an infielder and played second base and shortstop in his youth, but became a catcher when one didn't show up one day and played that position for the rest of his career. Players and sports writers who followed the game in the black press considered Buster to be one of the best catchers in the Negro Leagues. He played excellent defense, had a strong throwing arm, and ability to handle pitchers, and what's kind of known as baseball intelligence. He was also at 5 feet 8 inches tall, one of the shortest players. Although he was an excellent base stealer and runner, he was only an average hitter. Haywood was born in Whaleyville, Virginia in 1910. He attended the I.C. Norcom High School, which was the first high school in that region of Virginia near Portsmouth for black students. In 1932, the name B. Haywood begins to appear in newspaper box scores in the black press as the second baseman for the Grays of the Belleville Industrial School, also known as the Saints, and later as the Belleville Grays. Haywood played for and traveled with this team from 1932 to 1939. Next slide. The Belleville Grays had an unusual history and background. The team formed in the 1920s under the direction of Bishop William H. Plummer, leader of the Temple Bethel community of Hebrew Israelites. Founded as a religious community that understood themselves as the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, they observed many Jewish laws and customs, along with rituals derived from apocalyptic Christian and also Masonic traditions. Temple Bethel was a self-sustaining residential community that owned a large plot of land near Portsmouth called Belleville. The community farmed the land and maintained a lumber mill. Plummer organized the baseball team to provide recreational opportunities for members. Baseball was so central to the life of the community that Plummer built a wooden frame ballpark on the land, not unlike those wooden frame Roman amphitheaters. The team wore professionally made uniforms, used the best equipment, and played high-caliber baseball. Bishop William Plummer died in 1932. His son, Howard Z. Plummer, who you see there in the photo in the suit with the cap off, he was only 32 years old at the time of his father's death, but he succeeded him as the leader of this community. Until then, HZ, as he was known, had been playing second base on the Belleville Grays. But when HZ became chief rabbi, Buster Haywood took over his role at second base. Haywood's down in the corner on the left in the first row. Plummer had bigger ambitions for the team than his father had. Under his leadership, the Grays held spring training sessions in Florida. Plummer brought in several established players from the Portsmouth area, some of whom would go on to substantial professional careers in the Negro Leagues. Now, by 1935, most of the players were no longer community members. And in the photo that you see, there are very few community members. Mark Hill, Sonny Jeffries, and maybe Buster Haywood, who was they were the only ones who remained from the 32 team. Now, by 1938, Plummer had built the Belleville Grays into the dominant team in Virginia. They played league games against local teams, they met Negro League teams in exhibition games, and they won whatever the Virginia World Series for African American teams was at that point. The team was frequently referred to as the Plummer Men in the newspapers, an indication of Plummer's involvement and his powerful influence. Although the team professionalized, they maintained their Israelite character and commitments. In newspaper listings, for example, when they were seeking games, they made it very clear that they would play any day excepting Friday and Saturday, apropos of our conversations yesterday and this morning about religious commitments of sporting enterprises. It's actually not clear what Haywood's exact affiliation with the community was. At the very least, evidence suggests that he was in some way part of this group and abided by community rules, which included no smoking or drinking. But in all the people that I interviewed, none of them pegged him as a member of the community, although I have some countervailing evidence that I will get to later in the paper. Nonetheless, like other members of the Belleville community, Buster would have most likely kept his affiliation as an Israelite hidden. Temple Bethel maintained a high level of privacy about their identification as Israelites, and their unique religious practices, which set them apart both from the mainstream of the African-American community in Portsmouth and from white Jewish groups who tended to be rather skeptical about their identification as Jews and some of their religious practices. Compared to other work available to black men in the South, professional baseball paid well. Buster was enticed to seek more competitive opportunities, and in 1935 he traveled to Jacksonville to try out for a new professional team that would become part of the Negro National Leagues, the then Brooklyn but later Newark Eagles, owned by Abe and Effa Manley, and managed by a man who would eventually become a member of the Hall of Fame, Ben Taylor. Buster played a few games with the team, but ultimately Taylor judged Buster to need a little seasoning, so Buster returned to Portsmouth. From that point on, Buster was the star of the Belleville Braves, and his individual accomplishments, both at bat and behind the plate during this period, were often chronicled in the sports pages of the local African-American paper, the Norfolk Journal and Guide. He frequently garnered headlines for scoring or batting in the winning run. He hit at the top of the order because of his ability to run the bases, which was an unusual spot for a catcher. Haywood's talents caught the attention of the new manager for the Birmingham Black Barons of the Negro American League, Ben Taylor's brother, known as Candy Jim. The Barons signed Buster and 3 other Grays players to play for them in 1940. Buster played with the Black Barons for only a brief period of time, however, in the beginning of the 1940 season. Although he was playing at a more competitive level with the Black Barons, the salaries they offered did not compete. In search of better wages, he left the Barons in mid-May to join an independent traveling team, the Ethiopian Clowns. Another thing, thank you very much. The Clowns did better financially, but at a price. When Buster joined the team in 1940, the Clowns played in whiteface, sometimes in grass skirts, and always using invented African pseudonyms. Ethiopia was in the news, and the Clowns' owner, Sid Pollock, one of the Jewish businessmen who was involved in the Negro Leagues in the Depression era, thought nothing of exploiting the reference, despite the anger expressed by Negro League owners and black sports writers over the trivialization of this powerful African kingdom that was under siege. Note also one of Pollock's innovations was these dark uniforms, apart from the face paint that I think you can see in that photo. We were talking before about how whites signified a certain kind of class privilege, but also was, in fact, a class privilege. It meant you could actually wash your uniforms. And in the Negro Leagues, the players, it was left up to their own devices to figure out how to launder their uniforms. So Pollock, both in a gesture of economy on his own behalf, but also economy on behalf of the players, realized that if he used dark blue uniforms, the players wouldn't have to wash them and they wouldn't have to worry so much about them. You can take the efforts of these white Jewish owners any way you wish. I try to use multiple interpretations so as not either to disparage them nor to try to apologize for some of the unbelievable things that they did. Pollock didn't care very much about calling them Ethiopian. He just employed a place name that would draw attention to the team and mark them as exotic Africans. Pollock was a genius at creating publicity and drawing crowds. Sports writers in the black press found his practices disturbing, but they were also very grateful to Pollock, who, unlike other owners, sent regular press releases to all the newspapers, often daily. Black newspapers relied on owners to report results, as the writers didn't have the budget to travel, and so Pollock's releases were very welcome. But team owners would not permit the Clowns in the Negro National or American League, not only because of the mockery the team made of Africa, but also because of the controversial type of entertainment the Clowns performed. The Clowns played serious baseball, and the men, like Haywood, that Pollock hired, were talented baseball players whose skill level equaled that of other Negro League teams, but they also clowned. In his first 2 years as a Clown, Buster played under the name of Kora, K-H-O-R-A, which is apparently a small town in southern Ethiopia, and often hit and ran the bases in his catching equipment. The various stunts and routines that were trademark of the team were not uncommon among barnstorming teams, black and white.